Hey everyone, welcome back. Thanks for joining us. Today we've got a brand new story to share with you. So let's begin. It began subtly, almost a whisper in the quiet rooms of the house. Unnoticeable at first. My wife, Sarah, and I had been married for years. A comfortable, worn-in tapestry of shared history, arguments smoothed over, and routines etched deep. Like any couple, we'd weathered storms, the brutal fire that claimed our old house, the awkward, temporary refuge in my grandmother's place. But this was different. Sarah seemed distant, not just stressed, not just tired from the upheaval. This was an emotional retreat, a quiet vanishing act I couldn't quite name. Conversations became disjointed, shallow exchanges. Her laughter, once the bright soundtrack to our lives, was replaced by an unsettling silence that thickened the air between us. Initially, I told myself it was the lingering trauma of the fire, the indignity of living like temporary guests in a house that wasn't ours. It wasn't her idea of a fresh start, certainly. But the look in her eyes, the way she held herself, spoke of something colder, something deliberate. The little things started to pile up like stones in my gut. Late nights from work, explained away by phantom meetings. Her phone, which used to lie forgotten on the counter, became an extension of her hand, its screen always angled away from my gaze. And the wedding ring, conveniently left behind, a sudden poor fit, an oversight in a rush. Each excuse a tiny, sharp edge. I tried to push the thoughts down. Every relationship has phases, I reasoned. Maybe this was just a rough patch, a moment where we drifted and needed to find our way back. But the cold truth was, I was the only one looking for the path. The tipping point wasn't a dramatic fight. It was mundane, quiet, and therefore devastating. One evening, I suggested we watch one of her old favorite shows together, something we'd done religiously for years. She looked at me from over her phone screen, her expression vacant, as if I'd proposed solving a complex equation on the spot. No, she said flatly, not even bothering with a glance. I'm tired. Later that night, I saw her in the living room, phone in hand. She was laughing, a deep, unrestrained sound that hadn't echoed in our house in months. Not the polite chuckle for a meme, but the kind of laughter that spills out when you're connecting with someone who makes you feel seen, alive. In that moment, looking at her lost in that digital world, I knew she was pulling away, and there was someone else. The realization landed with the quiet weight of a tombstone. I tried to intellectualize it, tell myself I was overreacting, spiraling into unfounded jealousy. But the evidence was too stark. The small lies, the sudden, almost theatrical changes in her appearance, the absolute void where intimacy used to be. It all pointed to the same conclusion. She wasn't just tired of being my wife. She was actively building a bridge away from me, heading towards someone else. How do you even start that conversation? Hey, are you cheating on me? It's not exactly small talk. So I waited. I watched. I became an unwelcome observer in my own home. I noticed the patterns, the sudden plans that materialized, the subtle shift in her tone when certain names came up. She wasn't just distant. She was functionally absent, an emotional ghost haunting the rooms we once shared. Looking back, perhaps a part of me had already accepted it. Her indifference had paved the way, making her emotional departure brutally clear. But another, stubborn part clung to the possibility of repair, of somehow coaxing her back. It was foolish, I know now. But when you've woven your life with someone, the thread doesn't break easily. You don't just surrender the whole fabric without a pull. At least that's what I told myself. The hardest part wasn't the suspicion itself, but the waiting. Waiting for the lie to surface, for her to admit what I already knew, or perhaps, worst of all, waiting for her to show she cared enough to bother hiding it better. I felt like I was living on borrowed time. Each quiet dinner, each strained interaction, a step closer to the inevitable collapse. Deep down, I think she felt it too. The night it all came crashing down was deceptively ordinary. I arrived home from work. The house was quiet. Winter twilight had already settled in. Pulling into the driveway, something felt off immediately. Her car wasn't in the garage. The porch light, usually a beacon, was dark. Normally, this wouldn't trigger alarm bells, but given the suffocating tension of the past months, my stomach twisted. I walked inside, calling her name. No answer. I moved through the silent house, assuming she'd just stepped out for a quick errand. But as I reached the stairs, I saw the light spilling from our bedroom. She was standing at the dresser, applying makeup. Not the usual hurried swipe of mascara. She was in a black dress I'd never seen shorter, with a neckline that was unapologetically revealing. Beside her, heels impossibly high. I stood in the doorway, frozen. She didn't notice me at first, absorbed in the ritual, perfecting a bold red lip that transformed her face into that of a stranger. It hit me then, cold and hard. This wasn't just going out. This was a deliberate presentation. She was dressing for someone. My chest tightened, but I held it together. No yelling, no accusations. Just a quiet question. Are we going somewhere? My voice was level, alien even to my own ears. Her hand paused. She glanced at me in the mirror. Not a flicker of guilt, only mild annoyance at the interruption. No, she said flatly. I'm going out. I have a date. I didn't react immediately. She seemed to brace for an explosion, shouting, pleading, the usual messy unraveling. But I just stood there, watching her reflection. Did you hear me? Her voice sharpened. I said I have a date. I'm going out with another man. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic drum in the silence. But I wouldn't give her the satisfaction of seeing me shatter. No, I repeated, my tone still eerily calm. She turned to face me fully, her irritation solidifying into impatience. No what? You're not going out. You're not going out on a date, I clarified. While you live under this roof, if you want to see someone else, fine. But pack your things and find somewhere else to stay. Once you're out, I'll file the divorce papers. Then you can do whatever you want. A sharp, brittle laugh escaped her. I'm not leaving, she said, a smugness spreading across her face. I like this house, and when it's mine, I'll do whatever I want with it. If you keep acting like an idiot, I'll make sure I get most of the money when we sell it. I took a slow, steadying breath, clinging to the last shreds of my composure. Do us both a favor, I said, my voice low but firm. Go stay with your parents until this is over. You're the one who wants out, not me. She crossed her arms, the smugness hardening into open contempt. Oh, I'll be back in 30 minutes, she sneered. You'd better not be here when I get back, or I'll call the police. I'll tell them you threatened me, maybe even hit me. You know how it works. They'll hold you for 48 hours, and by then, I'll have changed the locks. Cold, hardcore settled deep in my gut. The calculation in her eyes, the casual cruelty of her threat. She really thought she could just bulldoze me, leave me homeless and vulnerable. You're making a mistake, I said, my voice still calm, but with an iron edge now. You think you can scare me, but I'm not going anywhere. She rolled her eyes, dismissed me with a flick of her hand, and turned back to the mirror, muttering about fixing her lipstick. I left the room, my mind no longer racing with panic, but with a sudden, icy clarity. If she wanted to play dirty, I could adapt. She thought she held all the cards, her threats, her confidence, the way she spoke like she already owned the house and my life. It ignited a fire in me, not of rage, but of calculated, cold resolve. I wouldn't let her walk all over me. I walked into the garage, my eyes falling on the old aluminum baseball bat leaning against the wall, a relic from casual summer games years ago. I picked it up, testing its familiar weight. Her car sat outside, a dark shape in the driveway. I pictured her smug face, imagining her driving off to meet her lover, leaving me here to stew. Not tonight. I walked out, swung the bat with controlled force. For solid impacts against headlights and taillights. Glass shattered, metal crunched. The car was useless for driving anywhere in the dark now. I wasn't finished. I knew her routine. Her purse was always on the kitchen counter. Back inside, it sat there right where expected. I opened it, found her phone, another symbol of her hidden life. A dark, quiet satisfaction spread through me at its predictability. I took it back to the garage, removed the battery, placed the phone on the workbench and brought the hammer down. One solid blow, then another. It snapped into 3 pieces. Satisfied, I put the ruined pieces back into her purse, minus the battery. She wasn't calling anyone tonight. Inside her bag, I also found a small packet of condoms. For a split second, a malicious impulse flickered, pierce them? But no, that was messy, easily traceable, something she could twist against me. That wasn't the game I was playing. By the time she came into the kitchen, she was fully dressed, the black dress, high heels, the stark red lipstick. She looked at me with a mixture of annoyance and that lingering, misplaced confidence, as if this little inconvenience was just a temporary delay before her victory. Out, she ordered, pointing to the door, treating me like an intruder. I didn't move. Instead, I poured myself a cup of coffee, leaned against the counter, and took a slow sip. Good luck with your night, I said, as casually as if discussing the weather. Her eyes narrowed. What did you do? Her voice was sharp, suspicion replacing arrogance. I smiled faintly, took another sip. Why don't you go check your car? I suggested. Her heels clicked loudly as she stomped out the front door. Moments later, I heard the explosion of her rage, shouting, frustrated, furious. She stormed back inside, her face contorted. What the hell did you do to my car? She shrieked. I shrugged, keeping my tone light, almost bored. It's parked on the street. Anything could have happened. You bastard, she hissed. I'll just call him to pick me up. Go ahead, I said, gesturing to her bag. You'll need your phone for that. Her face froze for a second. Then, She yanked the phone from her purse. When the screen remained stubbornly dark, her fury reached a new peak, a raw, animal sound. "You broke my phone." I leaned back, crossing my arms. Maybe you should have kept a better eye on it. At that point, she was practically vibrating with impotent rage. She swapped her heels for sneakers and stormed out, presumably to find a neighbor willing to lend a phone. I watched from the window as she went from house to house along the street, growing more and more frantic, shouting by the time she reached the end of the block. I leaned against the counter, sipping my coffee, and waited. I knew it was only a matter of time before she found someone willing to help, or became desperate enough to follow through on her earlier threat and call the police herself. Either way, I was ready. She thought she was in control, thought she could dictate the terms of my humiliation. But by the time this night was over, she would realize just how wrong she was. I didn't have to wait long before things took a turn, though not quite the one I'd anticipated. As I finished my coffee, I heard the frantic pounding of her sneakers on the floor above me, then silence. My cue. I glanced out the window just in time to see her walking towards the garage. She wasn't going to give up on her plans easily. I knew Sarah. Impulsive, yes, but predictable in her desperation. She'd realized her car was useless and must have assumed my Suburban, the beast she used to call it, was sitting in the garage, a ready escape route just waiting for her. What she didn't know was that I'd disconnected the automatic garage door opener earlier that day, just in case she tried something exactly like this. I followed quietly, peeking through the side door. She climbed into the driver's seat of the beast. The big engine roared to life, a deep, guttural sound that filled the enclosed space. For a second, I almost stepped in, almost stopped her. But a cold calculation held me back. Let her make her own mess. She pressed the garage door button. Nothing. She tried again, a flash of frustration crossing her face. Instead of stopping, thinking, she did the most Sarah thing imaginable. She hit the gas. The beast surged forward. The impact against the heavy garage door was a violent, metallic shriek that tore through the quiet night. The power of that engine was too much for the old wood and metal. The sound of tearing, cracking, splintering filled the air as the beast burst out of the garage, dragging mangled pieces of the door along with it. But that wasn't the worst part. Parked directly behind the garage in what was arguably the worst possible spot imaginable was a police cruiser. 2 officers had just arrived, responding to Sarah's earlier, frantic threat call. The beast smashed into the front of the cruiser with sickening force, shoving the official vehicle back several feet, its front end crumpling like crushed paper. One of the officers, a man, had just opened the driver's side door when the impact hit. The door swung back violently, knocking him off balance and sending him sprawling to the ground, his face contorted in pain. His partner, a redhead I vaguely recognized from around town, was already moving. Before Sarah could even register the full scale of her catastrophe, the officer had yanked her out of the beast by her arm, shouting, "Get on the ground!" her voice cutting through the sudden silence that followed the crash. Sarah screamed something incoherent, flailing, but offering no real resistance as she was roughly pulled to the pavement and cuffed. Meanwhile, I rushed over to the injured officer. His nose was clearly broken, blood streaming down his face, but he was conscious, groaning. "Hold still," I said, kneeling beside him, cradling his head to stabilize his neck. "Help is coming." The next 20 minutes were a blur of flashing lights, sirens, and escalating chaos. Neighbors peeked from behind curtains. Some, bolder, stepped out onto their porches to gawk. More police cars arrived, then an ambulance. I answered questions, calmly explaining what had happened, all while keeping one eye on Sarah, who sat huddled in the back of another cruiser, handcuffed, sobbing and wailing like a caught child. By the time the dust settled, Sarah was on her way to the hospital, a bruised ego, a sore neck from the airbag, and a rapidly growing list of criminal charges. Reckless endangerment, extensive property damage, assaulting a police officer with a vehicle. As for me, I stood in the driveway, watching the mangled wreckage of the beast being hauled away. I should have been furious, perhaps devastated. But honestly, I just felt relieved. This wasn't just about a car or a destroyed garage door. It was about undeniable proof. Sarah, for all her threats, her manipulations, her arrogant certainty, had finally hit a wall, literally and figuratively. And for the first time in months, I felt like I could breathe again. The days that followed were a strange mix of police interviews, consultations with lawyers, and awkward phone calls from mutual acquaintances who had, of course, heard about the spectacular fiasco. Sarah, meanwhile, wasted no time digging her hole deeper. As soon as she was released on bail paid for by her parents, naturally, she emptied almost every penny from our joint bank account. $9,000 gone in an instant, leaving me with barely $1,000 to my name. I wasn't surprised. It was just another predictable, desperate move from someone who still believed she was calling the shots. My lawyer, a sharp, no-nonsense woman named Ms. Evans, and I got to work immediately. Thankfully, I'd anticipated something like this months ago, back when the subtle dread had first started to curdle into certainty. Before things had completely spiraled, I had quietly transferred ownership of my grandmother's house to my parents. Legally, it wasn't even in my name anymore. I knew Sarah would demand half of everything, and I wasn't about to let her take what wasn't hers, not after everything. She had no idea the trap she was walking into. At our first meeting in the lawyer's office, Sarah arrived with her own counsel, a slick, greasy man with a bad comb-over who clearly thought this was going to be an easy win. They didn't waste any time laying out her demands. Ms. Miller wants the house or half its market value, her lawyer began, sliding a stack of papers across the table with a smug flourish. We'll also be requesting all the new furniture purchased after the fire, the appliances, and a substantial portion of the insurance payout from the fire. I glanced at Ms. Evans, who didn't betray a single emotion. She calmly pulled out a document and handed it over. The house isn't community property, she explained, her voice cool and precise. It belongs to my client's father. Sarah has no legal claim to it. Sarah's face went pale, the red lipstick stark against the sudden lack of color. But she quickly recovered, leaning over to whisper furiously to her lawyer. He scanned the document, his smug expression slowly dissolving with every line he read. This can't be right, he stammered. But it was. They had nothing. And as for the furniture and appliances, Ms. Evans continued, pressing the advantage. We have receipts showing they were purchased with funds exclusively from my client's father's account. They aren't marital property either. Sarah's frustration was palpable. She crossed her arms, glaring at me as if I were the one who had committed some unforgivable betrayal, the irony heavy in the air. You're leaving me with nothing, she finally snapped. That's not entirely true, Ms. Evans replied smoothly, almost conversationally. We're willing to let you keep one of the bedroom sets, out of nostalgia. I could almost hear Sarah's teeth grinding together. She stormed out of the room a few minutes later, leaving her deflated lawyer to hash out the remaining paltry details. In the end, she walked away with her damaged car, a fraction of the money she'd stolen from the joint account, and not much else. Her lawyer recognized she was in a losing position and wisely advised her to settle before the judge heard the full story of the night she'd rammed my vehicle into a police cruiser. The judge didn't pull any punches when finalizing the divorce. He commended me for being proactive in protecting my assets, a thinly veiled comment on Sarah's spectacular failure to seize control. By the time the gavel fell, I was free, and she was left to deal with the legal and financial fallout of her own disastrous choices. It wasn't about revenge for me, not really. It was about survival, about not letting someone break you and take everything you had left. Sarah had tried to manipulate, intimidate, and bully her way to victory, but she'd profoundly underestimated the quiet resilience born of being pushed too far. She thought I'd just roll over. Instead, I played the long game, and when it was over, I walked away with my dignity intact, standing on solid ground she couldn't touch. After the dust settled and the ink dried on the divorce papers, I finally had space to breathe. Felt strange, stepping into a life that was solely mine again. For years, my routines, my worries, even my moments of happiness had been woven around Sarah. Now she was simply gone. The house, my grandmother's house, was quiet, but it was a peaceful quiet, not a lonely one. I could finally focus on rebuilding, figuring out who I was without the constant tension of her presence. I spent the first few months fixing up the house properly, reclaiming spaces that had felt borrowed. I reconnected with friends I'd neglected, picked up hobbies I'd let slide. It wasn't about distraction. It was about deliberately piecing myself back together. One of the first things I did was start going to the local shooting range again. It had always been a quiet escape, a way to clear my head. On one of those trips, I ran into Sergeant Miller, the redhead officer who had arrested Sarah that night. She was there off-duty, in jeans and a simple top, looking completely different from the stern, capable figure I remembered from the chaotic scene. We talked for a while. I learned she was newly single herself, her divorce a messy, drawn-out affair, though thankfully lacking the vehicular assault element of mine. One thing led to another and I asked her out. To my surprise, she said yes. That first date felt like stepping into a different world. I probably overdressed in my best suit, feeling awkward and out of practice, but she seemed to appreciate the effort. She was straightforward, grounded, and didn't play games. Neither did I, not anymore. 9 months later, we got married. And I can honestly say, without reservation, it's been the happiest time of my life. She isn't just my wife. She's my partner, my anchor, my best friend. We built a life together founded on mutual respect, trust, and a shared understanding of past difficulties, the two things that had been utterly missing in my previous marriage. As for Sarah, I heard bits and pieces over the years, the kind of fragmented news that filters through small towns and lingering connections. She remarried, twice from what I gathered, and seemed to have found someone who kept her on a tighter leash. Good for him, I suppose. The anger faded eventually. It took time, effort, and conscious choice, but I realized holding on to that resentment only poisoned my own well. She wasn't worth the space she occupied in my head. These days, my life is simple, rich, and deeply fulfilling. My wife and I recently celebrated our 25th wedding anniversary with a river cruise in Europe, a trip she'd always dreamed of. Our kids are grown now, making their own ways in the world, and I couldn't be prouder of the people they've become. Just last week, we handed over my grandmother's old house to our daughter as a wedding gift. Felt right, a strange, full-circle moment. That house, the site of so much pain and transition for me, is now starting a new, hopeful chapter for her. Every now and then, I think back to those chaotic days with Sarah. Not with regret, but with a strange kind of gratitude. They were brutal, yes, they showed me the darker, more selfish sides of human nature, including moments of my own coldness. But they also taught me profound lessons about who I am, what I'm capable of surviving, and the quiet strength of standing your ground when everything is being threatened. Life doesn't always follow the script you write for it. Sometimes, the most painful detours lead you exactly where you were meant to be all along. Standing here now, looking back at the long road traveled, I wouldn't change a thing.